of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Please be seated. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all this morning on this first Sunday of Advent. It marks the beginning of a new year. This is our new year, right? New Year's Day, I guess. And so it's always an exciting time in the life of the church. It's also a strange Sunday for us. It's strange because we begin this, the beginning of the story. We mark the beginning of the story by catching a glimpse of the end. It's kind of strange. We always start this first Sunday of Advent, and even throughout the season, we'll entertain these readings that are apocalyptic in nature. This reading from Mark this morning is called The Little Apocalypse. It's not like Daniel in the Old Testament or Revelation in the New. Those are the apocalyptic proper books. They are completely apocalyptic, sort of. But Mark and a couple of the other gospel writers include just a little dab of apocalyptic writing, or a little bit of that genre in their text. And we catch a little bit of that this morning in Mark's gospel. These apocalyptic writings are always otherworldly in nature. They've got these celestial happenings, strange happenings in the heavens. Usually it's related somehow to destructive events that are going on. In fact, this gospel lesson this morning begins with, it was just after this suffering, or as part of this suffering. It's almost, these apocalyptic writings are always a prelude to the consummation of God's reign. And so they usually come along when the people of faith are struggling with life. They come along when we're struggling with life, when we're in trouble. There's a sense of spiritual desperation. And so that's when Daniel comes along for the Jews in the Old Testament, 6th century BCE, back when the Babylonians came in and destroyed much of Judah in the south and destroyed Solomon's great temple. And, of course, Revelation in the New Testament comes along late 1st, early 2nd century, around the time of increased persecution of Christians. So these apocalyptic writings have been used for millennia to try to encourage the people of faith. Well, how do they encourage us? They remind us that God will have the last word. That's their sole purpose. It's very simple. It's really messy. It's otherworldly. It's strange. It's hard to get your heart and mind around. But that's the sole purpose of apocalyptic writings, to encourage us, to remind us that our God will have the last word, that all will be well. That all will be well. It's a message of hope. It's a message of hope and encouragement. So the more I thought about that this week, I had some experiences. I've had a number of experiences in the last couple or few weeks where this word hope has been a word that's been very much on my mind. And this morning we lit the candle of hope. Advent is all about hope and great expectation as we await God coming to us yet again. This God who's already come to us once, promises to come to us again, and you and I live in this place of in-betweenness, between the already and the not yet. And so hope is important to us. We're people of hope. But in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've had encounters with parishioners. I have been in situations with parishioners where I have heard, not just felt a hopelessness, but I've heard it communicated out loud. Hopeless. Hopeless. That demoralizing, debilitating, that dark hold of hopelessness had set in on this family or this person or this family over here. Any number of situations, dark, desperate situations, and all I heard was hopelessness. And I remember each time getting in my truck and like the writer of Isaiah this morning in the Old Testament, I found myself sort of crying out, "Where are you? Come down and do something. Come and do something. It's like the writer this morning. He says, oh, that you would tear open the heavens and come down. Can't you see that we're suffering? Can't you see how dark a day we are in? Where are you? We can't see your face. We can't hear your voice anymore. It's like you are absent from us. It's like almost like you've given up on us. Where are you? Right? So the more I pondered that, I found myself again getting in touch with this place that you and I live in, this place of the already and the not yet, where God has come to us, and yet Jesus ascends, He leaves, He returns to glory, and there's a sense that we are left to carry on. And there is this part of our worship every Sunday morning where we say He will come again in great power and great glory, and we're sort of stuck there in this middle place where we're trying desperately to figure it out, to be true to this God who has touched and transformed my life and yours, has brought us to life in new ways, has encouraged us along the way. And yet there are these times when it seems like He is so quiet, so absent. Dietrich Bonhoeffer writes about this in the Second World War. He is in a Nazi concentration camp at Flossenburg when he writes his letters from prison. It's a book you can go out and buy today. You should. Bonhoeffer is recognized as one of the great pillars of our faith over the past century or so. Bonhoeffer writes in those letters from prison just before he is executed by the Nazis in 1945, he writes something like this: this God who is with us is the same God who forsakes us. I just found that profound. This God who is present to us, who is with us, is also not with us. He is not with us. When I heard Bonhoeffer's words again about this God who is with us also forsakes us, I couldn't help but think about the image of Jesus there on the cross. Jesus, of course, experienced the same thing. God experienced the same thing in the life of His Son. God experienced the very same thing. God experienced the separation, the sense of the quiet, the haunting quiet. Father, why have you forsaken me? Where are you? I thought we were together in this, right? It's extraordinary, challenging images. Be reminded that Jesus is very much aware of God's presence and the reality of God's love. Bonhoeffer is very much aware of God's presence and the reality of God's love. It has shaped and changed his life. It has carried him back into Nazi Germany when others told him to stay away. He knew he would die. He knows he's not alone. And yet he cries out, "Where are you?" So I remember Bonhoeffer even goes on to write in those letters from prison. He says that what we learn as we look at the story of Jesus is that we learn that even Jesus doesn't stay in the world with us. He is sort of cast off onto the cross. And Bonhoeffer says that it's on the cross. It's as he's hanging there dying on the hardwood of that cross that we learn the most about the nature of this God who is not going to tear open the heavens and come down and manipulate life as it is. In that image of Christ on the cross, Bonhoeffer says we see the true nature of God, the one whose power is suffering, the one who came to suffer with us. With extraordinary vulnerability, this God comes down and He suffers with us. It's that word compassion that drives Jesus in his ministry. At every turn, it says he had compassion for them. He doesn't heal everyone in the flesh. He doesn't cast out every demon. He doesn't make everything good again. He doesn't leave them alone in their suffering. He has compassion for them. He suffers with them. Bonhoeffer, as he writes there just before his death, he says, that is the power of God, his suffering. That is his omnipotence, his willingness to be vulnerable for us. So I came back to the church each time after having these encounters, struggling within my own spirit, wishing that I could do more, right? Wishing I could change things. And I would make a phone call or two to people that I thought might be able to help. And then suddenly, in the response of the people on the other end of the phone, people who are moved by the love of God, not just a willingness, but a desire to be compassionate, to suffer with their neighbors, to care for those who are in trouble, who are struggling, to make sure that those folks are not left alone. People who are willing to practice the presence of the Almighty in and through their lives and their faith experience. People who are not so self-absorbed that they were immediately willing to move into that place of being present to another, of helping another as much as they could. And suddenly I said, I see your face again. I see your face again. I hear your voice. I still wish you'd come down and do something. But I know you're there. I feel it in the hearts and in the minds and in the compassion and the love and the support and the encouragement of the people of faith who are responding to the cries of their brothers and sisters. I see your face. I hear your voice. How many of you remember Mr. Rogers? Remember Mr. Rogers? Some of you are too young. Mr. Rogers, by the way, if you've never read Mr. Rogers' story, it's a fascinating story. You don't know his story. Really, it's an extraordinary story. But Mr. Rogers, I used to play Mr. Rogers all the time. Before I became a priest, Carol and I we were youth leaders back 30-some years ago, maybe 35 years ago, maybe longer than that. But we were youth leaders, and I used to do a Mr. Rogers routine. I was real good at it. I was also a little smaller, looked more the part. I put the sweater on the other day. It was a little tight. Mr. Rogers, when he was a child, he told his mother, he said, he was watching the news. He'd see all these news reports, and he talked to his mother about how the images on the news scared him. And his mother's response was, Fred, look for the helpers. His mother said to Fred, look for the helpers, Fred. There will always be helpers. There will always be helpers. And suddenly, I was right back in touch with his loving presence. This one who never leaves us alone, who manifests his power not in a coercive love, but in a non-coercive love. He doesn't tear open the heavens. He doesn't come down and manipulate life. He holds us and he suffers with us through it. And he promises us that the suffering will not have the last word. Death itself will not have the last word. He's coming. He's coming again. He's always coming. This season is about getting up each morning and expecting him to come in some new way to reveal God's self to us. Open your heart, your mind, open your spiritual eyes, your spiritual ears to see and hear him. Listen for his voice. It's there. It's an encouraging voice. It's a face full of compassion and love and encouragement at every turn as we hold each other through this great ordeal. Amen.